Yeah, thank you first of all, Bangalore Film Forum and Griffith Institute for this massive event. I'm really excited to be a part of this, and thank you for having this discussion. Basaf, where do we begin? Where do we begin?
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to do a unmoderated discussion, but
Yeah.
yeah, I guess, I mean, for those who don't know, maybe to start with, who is Harun Farooqi, maybe. Harun Farooqi was, I mean, he's of course a German. He was born in Germany, I think, or later it became Czechoslovakia, I think. But when he was born, it was still Germany. And then, but he was born to Indian parents who migrated to Germany. And then I think he went to the, or rather, he went to the Berlin Film Academy, DFFB, if some of you know. And then, of course, he started working in the 60s is when he was studying, and then he graduated and he started making films. And like you have seen over the last 3 days, the his kind of films transcend many forms, and they're very different. Each film is different from the other one. Um, yes, I think that's a brief introduction of Farooq. Farooqi was also here in India, I think, a decade ago, when he was making this installation called Labor in a Single Shot, where he worked with many filmmakers and even students like Shishti film students in different cities in the world, and made an installation called Labor in a Single Shot.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's a brief introduction. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's this quintessential child of the 50s who came of age, politically speaking, in the 60s, especially with the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
So he writes about growing up under the influence of his very, very authoritarian father, who was a doctor from Kashmir, and a mother who was German, but who wanted to just move on from the past of the country, whatever happened during the war and before. So these two twin forces, I kind of watching his works together here, kind of I can see that it has a spectral presence. This tendency to forget the past and move on, and also this tendency of authoritarianism and rebelling against that. So these two twin tendencies, which begin at home, seem to kind of haunt the rest of his work. And maybe that could be a segue to our discussion about Farooqi's relationship with the past. I mean, it need not be a personal past, but the past of Germany or the Western world in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obvious to any people who watch the films today, right? There is a lot of history in his work. So he's mainly working as an archivist, extracting these images made in historical time, and then trying to rediscover, analyze them, and make a like an essay film out of it, right? So, I mean, and but what is interesting, I think, is although he has history in almost all of his films, but it is he's more interested in sort of how images have tracked these historical times, whether it's industry, whether it's war, and now what we saw in prisons, right? So there is of course his in that way he's very interesting, because he's looking as an image maker himself. He's looking at images and the history of images, and how images are made, and how images can tell history in very different ways, right? I think that's what I mean, he, unlike, say, just to give some comparison to understand, unlike many other filmmakers of his time in 60s, 70s, like, Alain Renault's Night and Fog, etc., where we have a retelling of history. He's not really retelling history in any of his works. He's kind of almost creating a new language to talk about history, right? And this history is something which nobody has talked about. So in that way, it's unique. Whether instead of, say, making a film on Holocaust and telling how Holocaust happened, who was Hitler, etc., etc., he's not doing all that. He's directly jumping into, say, images made by the Nazis, or images made by the American bomber when it shot when it was bombing during the war, right? So like that, it's sort of is a very different. I remember when I first watched his film. I think it was Workers Leaving the Factory. I was stunned, because it's like, first of all, I didn't think this could be cinema. We were very naive young people at that time, and it's like, wow, this is something new, right? So that's because you have so much to say, and he's making us see things. The workers leaving the factory, for any cinephile, you would have watched it 100 times in classes. Everybody will show you Lumiere's film, first film ever made, etc. But like, for example, I had never seen the dog until he kind of pointed it out in the film, and or even that lady tugging the other lady's skirt, right? So even though we have seen those Lumiere films 100 times, it tells you how closely he's sort of working with these images. That's why no wonder he's called an archaeologist in a way, because he's rediscovering these objects or image objects,
Yeah.
if we can call them objects. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, as you say, the archival images, there is in Farokhi's work this tendency to kind of refuse to image the past. I mean, there are hardly any images of the camps or the rallies and so on, except maybe in images of the world and inscription of war that we saw on the first day. There is this very principled refusal to show the horrors of the world, and that's most apparent in the film that we saw earlier today, which is Inextinguishable Fire, where he says, if we show you images of people burned by napalm, you'll close your eyes, then you will close your eyes to the fact and then to the context and to the whole thing. So there is this tendency to kind of tackle brutal piece of history head on, but without imaging it. And it's almost as if, there is that moment in Images of the World and Inscription of War, where the Allied reconnaissance planes have photographed the camps, but they have only been able to recognize that the factories that were on the periphery of the camp. So it's taken them 35 years to actually put a name to the camps. So it is one of Farokhi's theses that cinema has always been delayed with respect to history, and it's always catching up. And so there is this refusal to reconstruct history because whenever you reconstruct history, whether it's something like Schindler's List or any other way, it only produces like very maudlin kitsch at worst, or a very weak emblem of commemoration at best. So there is in Farokhi's work, which I think is very defining, this refusal to image the past and to kind of tackle history as it is moving in the present.
Yeah, and that's there from the beginning, like the first two films today, right? White Christmas, which is one of his early films, 66 or something, I think. And then the Inextinguishable Fire. Probably his two most polemical films, I would say, because those are the two films where you see some direct reference to the Vietnam War and the Dow Chemicals Company, and so there is some direct political reference which you don't find him in his later works. He's looking for deeper phenomenon. Even in Inextinguishable Fire, for example, the whole the scripted sequences, I find them fascinating because they are not really about just incriminating Dow Chemicals, but like sort of going to the level of engineers, workers, students, and saying that's how these are the people who can change it and not the corporate. He's not looking at easy sort of blame game, but he's looking at the deeper phenomenon, and he goes into this. You've seen the scripted scenes, each of them trying to sort of justify, or to themselves, not to the audience at all, themselves saying, oh, I don't know, I'm just making a pesticide or whatever. I don't know if it's used for war, like a scientist position, right? Which is a dilemma which is very playfully brought out in those stage sequences, right? But of course, the burning of the cigarette and the animal burning in the lab are, way more direct than what the rest of Farokhi films are. And as Srikanth mentioned, is the direct influence of the student protests at the time, the anti-Vietnam War protests everywhere, and Berlin, of course, one of the capital of the protests at the time. And he was young, and so no wonder there is an influence of that, right? But speaking of history also, the image history is also there, in the sense that if you see his work, say 1 or 2 times, you kind of get a hang of entire image making history from the way and with multiple perspectives, right? But one is how image making has changed in terms of, say, tools and how the camera is used, etc., and going all the way to the machine-made images in surveillance cameras, etc., that he goes on to. But it's also about how images have been telling us about important phenomenons of the world, like work. Right, work is a big theme in his films, right? And he kind of says about how the utility of images has changed, from just entertainment, which dominated the early image making, whether it was photography or moving images, to now sort of images are more than that, right? They're, like he says in that first day's film, Inscription of War Images, where he sort of says how he coins that new term, operational image. Operational image, what he defines it as is an image which actually has a purpose, in the sense that it has an action at the end of it. So if you're a missile camera, then there is an action at the end of it. The moment you identify a target, you're going to fire the target, which is not true for, say, an image made for entertainment. There is not necessarily an action at the end of it. So he calls them operational images, even for prison surveillance images or traffic surveillance images. He kind of lays it down, and he shows the robot sort of lifting. There's an action there also. The robot is recognizing the item to be picked up, and then it picks up. So there is sort of an operation, an action at the end of it. So, I mean, he's credited with that theory which nobody had thought of. So just a little bit on that. Yeah.
So, I mean, this whole questioning of this history of visual culture, that's so central to his work. I mean, he in Images of the World and Inscription of War, one of those cornerstone films of his body of work, he begins with the idea of the architect Meyerbeer, I think his name is.
Meidenberg.
Meidenberg.
Yeah.
In short, there is this person who's trying to measure the measurements of a facade of a church, and he's almost like he's dropped to death. So, and then he comes up with this scale measurement technique whereby he can actually measure the dimensions of the facade without actually having to put his body in danger. So this idea of images kind of becoming intermediaries in one's lived relationship to the world is so crucial to his work, because these images, whether they be images or whether they be engineering images or images of colonial legacy, like photographs of Algerian women and so on, they've always been a way to predict the world and tame the world and kind of put a name to the chaos that is out there. So for Farokhi, images are always implicated in this process in which an uncertainty is eliminated. So one of the recurring themes of Farokhi's work is this uncertainty avoidance, this tendency to kind of eliminate all uncertainty from everyday life, or let's say military life. That's either through imaging or through repeated training sessions or workshops and so on. So there is this constant tendency to predict life and kind of preempt any kind of any kind of anarchic element that will kind of make the best laid plans go awry. So for Farokhi, the image performs that function of predicting the world. And when war terrains are mapped out in detail in advance, the war really becomes like a logistical formality. You just go there because you've played this simulation over and over. You know what to bomb, where to bomb, and so on. So images for Farokhi become this kind of ersatz where they kind of replace the world itself, so that they can be conquered in advance of the real event.
Yeah, I think he calls it the predetermined action, sort of, because you're simulating and playing the war game in your training as a soldier. You sort of have a you are predetermined, you know where is that, where in Afghanistan you're going to fire. So you kind of, when you're really firing, then the human element, he says, is, absent. So you don't feel, in a way, you don't get dragged into the way the soldiers in the earlier wars would fight with hands, right? So he also says, can we imagine a war? I mean, it's time rather to imagine a war without soldiers, like factories without workers, he says, which is also true. And so, two main concerns sort of we get there. I think it's also maybe we can talk about the way he works, way his films are, because many young people here would be surprised by the film language and the kind of, and what is this film kind of expression would be there, right? So because in this one is, of course, it demands more or less intellectual engagement rather than say an entertainment or uh, any dramatized, because even when he's sort of talking of say Holocaust, he's not putting in any melodrama, there is no dramatization, there is no even like sensational music, even when we are seeing murders on the screen like in the prison images just now, there is no external film element which is making you feel differently. He's asking you to put your mind to it, engage with what he's trying to say, with the role the image is playing in that thing, rather than say observing that, oh, the human being is dying. Of course, we will get that, but the idea is not that, right? So it's very interesting that he works purely at an intellectual level. Of course, his first two films, like I said, probably don't fall into that bracket. There is some sensationalization there. And he's working many times with found footage, right? He's not, people after watching the film, if you tell them that there is not a single shot he has actually shot using a camera, people get surprised. But you watch the entire film, like today, I think all four of them that we saw had not a single shot taken by Farooqi with his camera or his cameraman or whoever. It's all found footage, right? Extracted from archives, used, repurposed, and used to for his film, right? In a way, which means that he's sort of working in his own, which we'll see now. I think later the film on his own work, the interface,
Yeah.
right? Which we'll see after this, but where he explains how he works. But it's like sort of he's like a scientist, right? Working in a laboratory. He's not really a filmmaker who, the cinema verite, etc., where people would go on the streets, interact with other people, society, ask questions, interview people, etc. No, he's not. He's sitting in his laboratory. He's working on his, the material he has carefully collected from archives, and then making sense of them for us with a very intelligent script. Again, the script itself, the way he says, I mean, that's why I was saying when we watched Workers Living for the Factory, it would have been fascinating to watch with his commentary, because his commentary, his voice, etc., has a certain prosaic quality to it. I mean, it doesn't evoke any emotion, right? It's very like a professor, like even professors sometimes get emotional, but he's not. He's like very prosaic delivery of what he's saying. For example, one of my favorite films of his, of course, is Videograms of a Revolution, right? I mean, it's such a sensational topic, this whole Romanian revolution. It's happening on the screen. We are seeing images of the dictator going away, taken away, people shooting on the streets, etc. But the commentary that he provides completely waters down that dramatic quality of that sort of action which is happening in the images he's showing. And it's also, there is a certain restraint in the way he works, in the sense that there is a certain it's almost like the aftermath, right? Romanian Revolution happened, and then in the next 2 years, he discovered he met this Romanian professor in Berlin, and he said, why not, let's look at the role the video camera played in this revolution, right? When nobody was thinking about these kind of things, he's kind of, looking at, okay, what is the role video camera played? I mean, even now we can think of these things when we see, say, riots, everything. Now we can think of mobile camera, the way the footage is coming out, which is rendering a lot of, say, for example, mainstream news little bit it's much delayed. We don't have to wait for 9 p.m. news to know what is happening. We would have already got on your WhatsApp the video clip of the actual incident, right? So in a way, similar how he would have looked at the videograms of revolution in the whole Romanian revolution thing, right? So that kind of ability to sort of step back, think about a historical event or incident which has happened, in almost like sort of, again, like a researcher, scientist, think about it and then ideate and then come up with a sort of a very impactful theorization about the role of the image in that particular historical event is classic Farooqi, I would say. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, you say this desire to step back, but also not to kind of allow the viewer to immerse themselves into the narrative. I mean, I think we should mention the influence of Bertolt Brecht
Yeah,
here,
of course,
because
yeah.
one of his lifelong influences. I mean, you can see it in Inextinguishable Fire. This desire to put together things that are conventionally separated. I mean, workers are saying that, okay, I just manufacture amino acids or whatever. I just manufacture detergents. I just manufacture pesticides. How is it that you put all these good things and then finally napalm comes out of it? It's like I'm putting together gun parts and finally, or vacuum cleaner parts, and then there is gun. So this desire or tendency to put things together where they would be conventionally separated is I think it also comes from Brecht also, and this instinct of stepping back and looking at things from a distance that keeps appearing in so many different forms, whether it's the early agitprop films or Erzählen, the film that we saw on the other day, where he's looking at the process of historiography itself, about the structure of historical narratives and fairy tales and so on. So, but again, this even in this 80s, when he's actually making these observational documentaries, which are like these pieces of reality, it is also in a way a way of revealing social mechanisms. How is social ritual or social behavior reproduced through training sessions and so on? So it is a way of revealing the mechanisms or the gears of the social machinery. So Brecht keeps appearing in so many different forms, even until the last few films, Serious Games, where which was screened in Bangalore, I think, and where you see military training and military sessions where soldiers with PTSD are treated and so on. And then all of this is revealed to be a simulation. So, yeah, again, this tendency to step back, not let the viewer be immersed in the world and take it for real. I think it's a lifelong preoccupation for him. Maybe we could also speak about other influences and also maybe his peers. Where do you see Farooqi's work in the tradition of filmmaking?
I mean, he definitely emerged from the new German cinema, which gets screened here, I'm told, very regularly, right? Like new German cinema, many of you would know great new German filmmakers like Wim Wenders and Fassbender, Alexander Klug, etc. So for Farooqi, of course, he was very fond of, or he admired Jean-Marie Straub and Klug. So clearly there is an influence of all these, quintessential Marxist filmmakers of the time. The politics, definitely there is that, and also the women collaborators like Angus Storm, who worked with him in the About Narration film, which was screened on first day, and then of course his later partner, the Antema. Yeah. So she also was part of. They also did many installations together in Farooqi's later years. So definitely an influence of filmmakers who had very convincing, I would say, ideologies, or very consistent ideologies rather, like Jean-Marie Straub, who didn't change his view of cinema or view of politics. Very interesting. Even Godard. Farooqi worked with Godard too, and he had a huge fan of Godard too. But what I find very interesting is, although these are great figures, he has sort of admired them, influenced, etc., but none of their style comes into his filmmaking. He's still able to again sort of step back and find his own sort of way of working, which is if like we know so many filmmakers who imitated their gurus, so called, right, which is a very normal tendency in artists, right, to like someone and you sort of try to make the similar kind of film. But he somehow is, and I would say from his very early days, which is very surprising for a 20-something young filmmaker, artist to have this kind of conviction that this is the kind of film I'll make, is very, very, I think, stunning, astonishing, I would say, because I teach at a film school and 20-something students are always there, and we don't see that. It's a rare thing, to have that kind of conviction at a very young age, to also not follow any tradition. It doesn't follow any documentary tradition which was there at the time, or any fiction tradition for that matter, right? So it's very different. He has his own film language. In a way, that's why I think, he's one, I would say, who actually looks at cinema as modern art, right? So there's a very, very modern in his ideology also, because he's also continuously engaging with what is new in image making per se. There is no nostalgia of, say, even though he's a Marxist, quote unquote, in terms of political ideology, there is no nostalgia that we see in, say, Marxist artists for a certain Marxist vision, but there is a certain continuous engagement with the current world. Iraq War happened, he kind of was surprised by the images he saw on TV, he worked on it, something, and he saw these new prisons, worked on it. So it's kind of modern, right? So it's very modernist attitude to art, and the form itself, Farooqi's film form itself he treats it like a very modern art, right? That's why it's also, we see different kind of works. There is TV work, there is films, then there is observational documentaries, and then there is installations. That's like a sort of an arc which defies all kind of categorization you would think of. So it's continuously innovating, engaging. So very modern per se. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Godard, and one of the most striking things is to kind of trace the career of these two filmmakers. I mean, Farooqi, of course, he was 24 at the time of the 1968 protests, and he came of age, so to speak, there. And Godard, 1930 born, he was 38, and still he was a generation behind, and that's the moment where Godard becomes this very politically committed filmmaker, and for the next 20 to 25 years it's almost identical, these two filmmakers. Of course, Farooqi was like a nobody, and then he started making all these agitprop films, but Godard was at the peak of his popularity, and then it changes. He goes into this exile where he's making films in isolation as a collective, agitprop films, exactly at the same time that Farooqi is making. Then he makes films on video with children, then TV commissions and so on. And there are so many overlaps. But when in the 90s, when Godard makes, at the same time, in 1995, when the world is celebrating the centenary of the medium, Godard, when he produces Histoire du Cinéma, he's looking back at 100 years of film history, and he's giving a damning report. For him, cinema is dead, and it has not taken up the challenge that history posed it. So Godard's work in the 90s becomes so melancholic and backward-looking, very inward-looking in some sense. But Farooqi's work from the 80s onward, it's always projecting itself into the future in some ways. It's like, when I look at things like AI and machine learning and so on, it's almost as if Farooqi's films are like building up to this moment. They're always like outward oriented. And when he's making workers in a factory, he says, it's an image, like an expression that can be used in any kind of situation. Maybe we could touch upon Workers in the Factory, and then go to his legacy and so on.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Workers Leaving the Factory, we all watched today. I think what it does, of course, is he collects, from movies made. It's also a centenary film, and he made in a sort of a celebration of 100 years of cinema, so to say, 1995, right? And he looks at this image of workers leaving the factory as a motif across, cinema made for 100 years, right? So he kind of extracts these images and then sort of builds a certain theorization around use of it in different ways, right? Different motive. And what is interesting is in that, particularly in this film, for me, for example, is that he's commenting on the nature of work, how it has changed, right? And there is a connection he's building with how factories are changing. He's connecting, say, factories and prisons sometimes. He's connecting, workers' movements to different kind of art. In some, I think, in the German film that is shown, he says they're moving like a choir in an opera. So it's very interesting kind of connections only he can build. That is and he kind of repeats, and we kind of get familiar with his technique of showing one image, then re-showing it, and then adding his tidbit on top of it, right? So it's not so you're almost, it's like a class. You're kind of going through. You first watch it and you think, oh, that's Marilyn Monroe, right? In that,
Yeah. In
So we see Marilyn Monroe going out of factory, talking to the boyfriend, and first we watch it very carefully. We don't have any. I didn't have any great thoughts about what it's saying, but then he again replays it, then sort of says something about how that motive, and the way he looks at this one simple shot, which is workers leaving the factory, from many ways, right? He takes girl waiting for, or a woman waiting for a man, then man waiting for a woman. He says how different the film scenario is if the woman is waiting for the man. For example, he has lost his job, he's coming crying. Whereas when the woman is coming out of the factory, the film scene seems to be something else, like he's either a thief who's trying to, or a molester who's trying to molest her, and somebody else comes and saves her and they move on, or there is this boyfriend conversation in the Marilyn Monroe bit. And then from those human relationship, then he goes to this idea of gates, factory gates, and sort of shows montage of different factory gates. And I don't know if this version is different, because I remember he also talks about how in today's factories, like he says, when you see the workers leaving the factory Lumiere shot, you don't see the company logo, company name, all these things. But later in the film, he says that, look at today's industries, you will see big company logo, but you don't see work in the images, right? In the earlier cinema, you would see people weaving, working with the machines, like, the Berlin Symphony film, and Ziga Verto's film, right? And those things, he kind of plays and says, we could see people working, right? Now he says that we can't see people working. The nature of work has changed with the, he says, death of industry in a way, because modern industry is not really an industry in the industrial revolution sense. So he says, now we see logo of the company, big walls, there is no image of the work. Right? So what does a steel company today, what image would represent a steel company today? He asked this question, and he says it's just, they will put a representational picture of, say, a bridge, but not of workers working. So these kind of very intelligent observations also he's making of nature of work. We talked about the human connection, and what else does he do in the film? And of course, he brings in the strike and how the strike has been represented in these images. And very interestingly, he talks of the spaces, the space in front of the factory gate, right? As a site of protest, as a site of congregation, as a, so it's very different. So all these kind of different analytical points, categories he goes into. Right? What are your thoughts?
This is, film made for the centenary of the cinema, but again, there is no self-congratulation here, right? His assessment of cinema comes from the primordial image of workers leaving the factory. And that film itself has a very interesting history, because the film that we saw here is a third version that Auguste Lumiere shot. The first two were failed takes, because the horse buggy that's there at the back of the image failed to come and the gates refused to close. So these two were failed takes, and Lumiere calls his workers the following Sunday and then asks them to perform for the camera again. That's why you see some of them are in fancy Sunday clothes and church clothes and so on. So there is already in Lumiere's film this tension between work and leisure, between private property and public property, between romance and work and so on. And he's just drawing those implications one by one. And that space, which is so critical in cinema, Straub has also filmed them in Egypt, outside the factory, which becomes so dialectical, right? It's like beyond that, that's the point where he says that's the point where workers become workforce and vice versa. And that's where the logic of capital kind of collapses, because once workers have come out, they kind of recognize themselves as individuals. So it's like you can contest the logic of capital and work and so on right at that gate. So that gate for him, it's like a dialect, I mean, embodies a dialectic between like a more entertainment-oriented cinema and also this Soviet kind of cinema, but also between ideas of work and leisure, capital and labor, and so on. So he's just taking the primordial scene of cinema, the scene zero, ground zero of cinema, and then trying to slowly draw its implication and see its echoes where it goes. So I find this work fascinating. I mean, watching Farokhi's work today, what does it mean, for example?
I mean, it's great to watch now, because I think there is one is also which Farokhi also experienced more and more as technology of filmmaking itself progressed. The form possibilities that he opens up are actually now very much possible for everyone to think. So I think he kind of provides you a framework to think about cinema, so to say, especially the essay film form, so to say. Because earlier, I mean, I've seen that many people think of essay film, when we say essay film, as a personal essay film where you're, sort of telling your own story, etc. Some incident in your life, or that's more the popular personal essay film, like Joyce at 34, Joyce Chopra's famous film, etc. Those kind of essay films, right? But now, it's sort of once you watch Farokhi, you're like, there is 100 more ways of looking at this essay film. So I think that contribution to this essay film form, I would say, is amazing, and it's a right moment to rewatch Farokhi, because we all have cameras, so it's not anymore. You don't need to really depend on any institution or anything, and that kind of independence also is what Farokhi's filmmaking evokes, right? There is no real. He's not working with big industries. There is no question of stars, etc. And it is an intellectual endeavor and an artistic endeavor at the same time. So that kind of legacy, once anyone watches Farokhi, I think that really sort of drives home that this is what you can do. You don't have to sort of say that, oh, nobody's giving me money, I can't do anything. All that kind of mundane conversations about cinema. I think he kind of, once you watch his work, he kind of makes you rethink all that. Yeah.
I mean, for me, I feel like we are living in a very Farokhian moment right now in 2024, because machines producing images, it's a story of 150 years. It's not a big thing, but machines are progressively replacing human sight. Machines as consumers of images is where, for me, Farokhi's work really becomes very, very illuminating, because already we see the signs of it in, I think, Images of the World, where there's an algorithm that reads the number of dots on a dice that is thrown at random.
Yeah.
And then there are objects, there are robots that are reading the room numbers and all that. And now in 2024, we have truly reached a moment where machines have the machine has become sentient. It can actually replace human sight. Even in 2004, when he made Counter Music, when thousands of cameras are observing train lines across Belgium and France, there is still the final human element, a guy who's sitting there and making sure that nothing dramatic is happening. But today, 20 years hence, I think that last hurdle towards dehumanization, that's also surpassed. Even that last human would probably lose his job today. That So I just wonder watching Farokhi's film today that would he have made of
Yeah.
things like artificial intelligence and machine vision and so on today as it is today. So, I mean, I think probably it's a testament to his work and legacy that we are kind of missing him at a moment where we need him the most to kind of make sense of the moment that we are living.
Yeah, and I think it also, his work also, building on what Srikant just said, it also asks filmmakers to question the images they are making, right? He's sort of constantly questioning his own profession throughout his all the films that you see. So now he's like the Dow Chemical example. If we just extend to today's time, it's also sort of now, all the people who work on AI technology or building these automatic cameras, etc. They, his work, I would think he would have pushed them to question themselves, the images they are producing and what does it mean for the society. Sort of, he tried to make sense of it. Not that he never really has a preaching solution, but he kind of would have pushed us to sort of analyze and sort of arrive at a existential question about as image makers, like for Instagram reel makers also. Yeah.
No, exactly. The Dow Chemical thing today would be like the Dow Chemical scientist says that I didn't make the bomb, I just made one part of it. I mean, today when we are sitting in an automated car and then it runs into some person and kills them, and like I didn't drive, it's not mine. So it's like there is this question of this relinquishing of responsibility, and that's playing throughout, and that's where we probably also heading. So. Yeah, so I mean, I really miss Farokh at this moment because he would be like really helping us think through
Yeah.
this historical episode.
Yeah, and I think that by the later time, he was more and more working also with the community, with his sort of the installations. He would make people make images and work with them for his installations, right? So it was, I think we would have seen more of that also with his later work. Yeah, do you want to open it for
Yeah,
questions?
let's
I think we have some time for questions
comments or
comments.
impressions,
Or, yeah.
anything at all. Yeah.
I think that Thomas Elsesser, he had said that he moved basically from cinema to the gallery.
Yeah.
And while you're very much missing him, I think Thomas also said that cinema perhaps has lost its status as a social relevant in the public space. Could you comment on that? And the second question that I have is about what I've seen of Farokhi is also that he very much warns. It's really a warning. Be careful, guys. Watch out, because something is happening. You should be thinking about it, reflecting about it. Could you, apart from the new German cinema, you mentioned Godard, are there others who you would put not in the same bracket, but in the same stream of filmmakers, so to say? Thank you.
Do you want to take the first? I'll take the first one. I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Thomas Elsesser is, of course, his essay is in the publication that is there, so please do read. And he also wrote, I think, full critical book on Farokhi's life and work. He's a film historian. I mean, I think what Thomas actually is trying to say is also that there is like Farokhi, for example, when he moved to the installation, there was an idea of after image that he was working on, right? So he called it the after image. So if you're sort of working with, because he says this predetermined image making, like these automatic cameras which are clicking, where you don't need human eye. There is a certain machine which clicks at a certain interval or based on a certain sensory input. So he said these images are sort of after image, and what he works on, of course, is, for example, even when he looks at videograms of a revolution, you can say he's working with after image, the implication of the after image. So in that way, he said this cinema losing social relevance, of course, is a very is more than I say a convincing theory. It's rather than an invitation to engage. It's a provocation for us to sort of think about what does cinema mean today, right? I think that's what Thomas means by that, rather than saying a full stop sentence. It's not that. It's more like a invitation to engage with what does cinema mean today, and we all are struggling with it. And even Hollywood is struggling with it. Nobody is coming to the theaters. We have a lot of huge problems of the traditional idea of cinema, entertainment cinema, so-called. Hardly any of them are making money. And then we have, but at the same time, we have this endless image making bombarded us from 24/7, right? So there is there is a crisis, sort of, to think about what cinema actually is today. I think it's just a provocation, I would say, to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, what do we mean by cinema? I mean, when we say cinema is a moment of social irrelevance, sure. When we think of cinema as this traditional, there's a producer of films, there's a consumer of films. They are separate, and the means of production belong to one, and then the means of exhibition to another. Certainly, I think cinema, in that sense, has gone on to the museums, and it's museumified. But at the same time, if we are talking about general image making, where we're all producers at the same time and consumers at the same time, Farokhi's work shows that really, I mean, we are living cinema. I mean, we can only look at each other through images. So that way, image making and this sort of audio-visual thing is probably not irrelevant, rather even more relevant. But cinema as we know it, if it is socially irrelevant, possibly. I mean, I don't know, it just. And Farokhi's work as an essay filmmaker, a modernist essay filmmaker, for me, it would recall works by Chris Marker, for example,
Marker, yes,
and Godard's video work, and generally Thomas Heiser's work, and a lot of filmmakers of his generation. But for me, Farokhi's work seems to have a bigger influence on filmmakers working today.
Yes.
Especially the essay filmmakers who are producing work from found footage or their own footage. For example, the French filmmaker Chloé Galibelani.
Yeah.
Or Kevin Bailey's desktop documentaries and so on. So
who is that woman who collaborated with him on one of the Asian woman? Yeah, I forgot her name, but it's yeah. So there are many who also younger filmmakers, I would say, who also worked with Farokhi and continuing to do, and many of them work in this gallery kind of installation. And his partner, how do you pronounce her name, Nandita?
Antia.
Antia.
Yeah.
Antia, yeah.
There is also Frederick Wiseman for the reference for the
for the observational films. You could always say Frederick Wiseman.
Hello. So many great minds have felt this guilt of making something great, or for whatever word it's used. Like Oppenheimer, Albert Einstein, and all. So this DOW film, Dow film, is also very much of a commentary in that sense. But even after feeling that guilt, it doesn't stop them from making it and doing something worse and harm people in that sense. So that film is much more relevant now than ever in this time. And even though it was made long back, it is still very much relevant in this day and date. So it just shows how timeless Farokhi was with his filmmaking and his image making.
Absolutely. I mean, what does it mean to write a piece of code today as an IT engineer, right? I mean, it's just a code, it's just performing a function. What does it mean though? I mean, it's a part of a vacuum cleaner. Is it a part of a bomb? We don't know. And that's exactly, I mean, Farokhi's idea, the core driving idea is that the military-industrial complex is kind of now generalized. There is no separate military-industrial complex. We are living that. The Fordian principle of division of labor here is used to kind of produce napalm and shield people from the consequences or whatever, the philosophical consequences of their own work. So it's always there. I mean, it's like, I mean, that's why I was feeling that there is this echo of the Third Reich that flowing through Farokhi's work, even when he's not doing it, right? He's talking about it's like, I was just following orders. In Dow Chemicals, I was just developing whatever detergents. And it's there. You may be developing detergents or writing a piece of code, but again, it's like, because you're alienated from where it's going to be, we're always going to have this tussle.
Yeah, I think if you have watched that, I think we screened that brick making film. We screened
Next.
It's next now.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. We're going to see that. So that also has this kind of globalized world. And I mean, of course, in that it's focusing on brick making and architecture, etc. But I think we could extend the argument to sort of the dislocation of production, which is today's the truth of globalization in a way. For example, one of you here sitting here might be working for, say, Bank of America. So the consequences a Bank of America customer might be having because of your code is, it's very hard for you to socially sort of relate to that. You might not care a damn, right? So the dislocation of this due to globalization and what it leads to different production processes is kind of, I think it touches philosophically in that observational film that we are going to watch. But yes, thank you for your comment.
Hi. My question is to either or both of you. But on the one hand, you say we're missing someone like Farokhi, and on the other hand, as Basil said, the means of production is such today that it's so easy for anyone to pick up a camera and make films. And yet, perhaps we don't see, or I think we don't see as many, call it essay films or whatever you want to call it, today as we did, say, about 30, 40, 50 years ago. Why is that? I've been wondering about that too. Or is that not true? Can you think of many filmmakers today who are working in that format? Or has that changed somewhat?
I mean, I honestly think we have more of those filmmakers, but I think, I think in the last Experimenta we saw Priya Sen's film, No Stranger at All, which is very much a sort of an essay film, I would say. So, somebody like Priya is a good example of Indian, I would say, contemporary Indian filmmaker who engages with this form actively. There is also Priyanka Chhabra. Is her latest film, somewhat not latest film, earlier film, where although it's partition, it has a certain kind of format which she plays around with, which I feel comes from the essay film. And she also made something called Summer Flu, which was something, these are just examples we both would have come across. I think it's a difficult question to answer, to be honest. It's to say that why we don't have. I think the problem is reverse. I think the essay films today don't get written about. There is the discourse or narrative of film criticism, for example, and what we read about cinema today is so controlled in a certain way. Even though we have so much of digital, you'll need to sort of dig out a blog like Srikant's to actually get into some kind of cinema which you're not familiar with, right? Or in a film school, somebody is introducing you to a certain form. But otherwise, for a lay person, it's very difficult to really go and read, because you wake up, you're seeing Film Companion, these things on your phone all the time because they're pushing it through the technology in marketing, etc. Right? So the discourse around, as you know, documentaries or these non-fiction hardly gets written about in India, even though the films which went to Oscars are hardly written about. So I think that's one major difference to how the discourse of filmmaking is today compared to, say, 70s, 80s, I would say, where it was more top-down then, in terms of, so there was some curator who was sort of interested in those, art movements, etc. I'm sure we would have missed many filmmakers then too, but at least there was that kind of, some kind of, within the art world, they were all working out of, I would say. This is my view, Srikant.
No, I'm also thinking aloud. Maybe we should look at this from the other end of the telescope, right? Why are fewer essay films produced, let's say? We are living in a moment where Farokhi himself... Farokhi lived in a moment where TVs were used to commission work like this. Yes. And there are festivals that are... Now funding bodies want a bound script and so on. And Farokhi's sense of play would be like, oh my God, you're all over the place. I don't know, maybe the structures of exhibition production has changed, that essay films kind of fall through the cracks, maybe, compared to, I don't know, conventional voiceover driven documentaries or fiction films. I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
know if it's a
nowadays most of
historical-
the essay films are come out of academic work, so like in practice-based PhDs, etc. So that's something I've seen a lot.
Yeah, lot of that energy is there in film essays that are published across the world, right? I mean, earlier they used to be like one thesis and it's following the images illustrating the voice, but now, again, Chloe's work is just so playful and so inventive, and it's a form of criticism. And there's also this Iranian filmmaker Mariam, if I'm maybe mispronouncing her name, Mariam Tafkori, I think, and she makes brilliant films which are film criticism, which are essays, but which are also art in their own way. So the impulse is still there, but probably it's taken refuge in maybe academia, for example.
Cool. Okay. Thank you. Thank you,
Yeah.
everyone. Thank
Yeah.
you again, Goethe Institute and Bangalore Film Forum.
Thank you so much.
That's lovely.